Imagine a Sunday afternoon in 1944. While the world crumbled under the weight of war, while millions of families prayed for peace, one man methodically oversaw the torture of over 1,000 Jewish prisoners. Every Sunday, at lunchtime, with the precision of a watchmaker and the detachment of a bureaucrat. This story will send chills down your spine, but it will also force you to question everything you think you know about good and evil. So subscribe now, because this truth has been buried for 80 years. His name was Colton Reyes. American commander, 32 years old, West Point graduate with honors, a man whose military record was so impeccable that he was chosen for a mission no one ever spoke of openly. In March 1944, Reyes was transferred to a secret prison complex somewhere deep in occupied Europe, a place with no official name, a place that didn't exist on any map. The prisoners simply called it the block. The guards didn't call it that at all. They knew it was best not to ask questions. Reyes arrived on a Tuesday morning, in an icy rain that turned the mud into a black swamp. The complex sprawled across several hectares, surrounded by electrified barbed wire and watchtowers every 50 meters. Gray concrete buildings, aligned with perfect military symmetry. No windows on the ground floor, just blank walls and metal doors. When he passed through the main gate, an SS officer was waiting for him. The man didn't introduce himself. He simply handed Reyes a file and said in broken English, "You are in charge of Block D. The interrogations begin next Sunday at noon. You have 6 days to understand how we operate here." Reyes took the file without a word. Inside, lists, names, numbers, more than 1,000 identities reduced to columns in an administrative register. Men, women, teenagers, all Jewish, all marked for intensive interrogation and information extraction. The first Sunday arrived too quickly. At 11:45, Reyes stood in the courtyard of Block D, watching the prisoners lined up against the east wall. They wore filthy striped uniforms. Their faces were gaunt with hunger. Some struggled to stay upright. Others stared at the ground as if they had already left their bodies. Noon struck. The bells of a distant church rang faintly across the hills, and the interrogations began. It wasn't like in the movies. There was no dramatic staging, no impassioned speeches, just a bureaucratic machine of systematic violence. The prisoners were called in groups of 10. They were taken to underground rooms where specialists asked them questions they couldn't answer, because the answers didn't matter. Pain was the goal. Reyes oversaw everything from a metal walkway overlooking the rooms. He noted the schedules, checked the procedures, signed the reports. His face betrayed no emotion. His hands never trembled as he held his pen. The other officers respected him for it, that absolute coldness, that ability to transform horror into administrative routine. Reyes was efficient. Reyes was reliable. Reyes did his duty. But no one saw what went on behind his eyes when he returned to his room on Sunday nights. No one heard the questions he asked himself in the dark, lying on his narrow bed, unable to sleep. No one knew that Colton Reyes had a secret buried so deep inside him that he had almost managed to forget it. Almost. Reyes had grown up in a small town in Montana. His father was a pastor, a gentleman who preached about loving your neighbor every Sunday in a wooden church that smelled of pine and beeswax. Colton was 8 years old when he saw his father protect a Jewish family that local thugs were trying to drive out of town. His father had stepped in. He had taken the blows for them. He had bled on the church steps while the family escaped. "Remember, Colton," his father had whispered that evening, his face swollen. "Remember that we are judged on what we do when no one is watching." Reyes had buried that memory. He had buried it under years of military training, discipline, and blind obedience to orders. He had convinced himself that war had its own rules. That duty came before conscience, that surviving meant forgetting who you had been. But on Sunday evenings, in the darkness of his room, his father's face would return, and with it, a question that gnawed at him like acid. "What became of you?" The weeks passed. Sundays followed one another with mechanical regularity. Reyes continued to supervise the interrogations. He continued to sign the reports. He continued to be the perfect officer everyone saw. But something was beginning to crack inside him. A silent rupture. An invisible fracture that widened with every scream he heard, with every body dragged out of the underground rooms, with every empty stare he met in the courtyard. In May 1944, an incident changed everything. It was a Sunday like any other. Noon had just struck. The prisoners were lined up. The interrogations were about to begin. But that day, a 16-year-old boy named Jacob attempted something impossible. He ran. In the middle of the courtyard, surrounded by dozens of armed guards, watchtowers, and electrified barbed wire, Jacob began to run. Not toward the exit. There was no exit. He ran simply because he could no longer remain still. Because dying while running seemed more dignified than dying on his knees. The guards didn't shoot immediately. They let him run. They were laughing. It was entertainment. A break from the routine. Jacob ran until he collapsed. His heart no longer had the strength to beat. His body had no reserves left. He fell face down, 20 meters from the east wall, his fingers clawing at the mud as if he could dig a tunnel to freedom. Reyes watched from his walkway, and for the first time in months, he didn't write anything in his report. He simply watched the teenager die slowly, alone, in the middle of a courtyard full of people who had forgotten what it meant to be human. That night, Reyes didn't go back to his room. He walked through the complex, inspected the buildings, studied the security protocols. He was looking for something, anything, a flaw, a system error, and he found her. In the basement of Block D, behind the interrogation rooms, there was a service door, a technical exit that the workers had used during construction. It led to a sewage tunnel that connected to the forest 800 meters from the complex. This door was supposed to be sealed, welded shut, sealed, but she wasn't completely. Reyes ran his hand over the rusted metal. He felt the play in the hinges. He pushed slightly. The door moved, just enough for a slender body to slip through. No one ever checked that door. Why would they? The prisoners didn't have access to that level. The guards never went down there. And Reyes was the only one who had the keys to that section. He stood there in the dark, his hand on the door, for a full 10 minutes. His mind was calculating, weighing the risks, measuring the consequences. Then he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. The following Sunday, during the interrogations, Reyes went down to the basement for a routine inspection. He walked past the rooms where the screams echoed. He reached the service door, and he unlocked it, just for 3 minutes. Then he went back upstairs, signed his reports, and said nothing to anyone. That night, 2 prisoners disappeared. The guards launched a search. They combed the complex. They questioned everyone, but they found nothing. The escapees had vanished. Reyes was questioned like all the other officers. He answered with his usual calm. He even suggested that the prisoners might have bribed a corrupt guard. The investigation stalled. The complex resumed its routine. But Colton Reyes had just crossed an invisible line. He had just become 2 people at once. The official torturer everyone saw, and the secret saboteur no one suspected. He didn't yet know how many lives he could save. He didn't yet know what price he would have to pay. All he knew was that his father's face had stopped haunting him at night. At least for now. Colton Reyes wasn't born to become a monster. No one truly is. But war has this terrifying ability to transform ordinary men into cogs in a machine that grinds down humanity. To understand what was really happening in this nameless complex, we must first understand who Reyes was before he was given the keys to hell. Born in Montana in 1912, Colton grew up surrounded by vast prairies and mountains that reached the sky. His mother was a schoolteacher. His father, the pastor who preached compassion and had profoundly influenced him, died of pneumonia when Colton was 15. On his deathbed, he held his son's hand and whispered one last time, "Be the one who opens doors, not the one who closes them." Colton had never really understood what his father meant, until that Sunday in May 1944, when he unlocked that service door for the first time. After his father's death, Colton threw himself into his studies. Brilliant, disciplined, and obsessed with making his father proud even after his passing, he earned a scholarship to West Point. There he learned to command, to obey, and to regard the chain of command as sacred. The army became his new family. Orders became his new moral compass. In 1943, when the U.S. Army was looking for officers for special missions in Europe, Reyes was selected. He wasn't told exactly what he would be doing. He was simply told that it was essential to the war effort, that men like him would make the difference between victory and defeat. He signed without asking any questions. That's what he'd been taught to do. But now, 6 weeks after arriving at Block D, Reyes was beginning to understand that there was no glory in what he was doing, no honor, just systematic participation in something unspeakable. The other officers at the complex were different from him. They were there out of conviction, out of ideology, out of pleasure sometimes. Reyes observed them during meals in the officers' mess. He listened to their conversations. He noted their habits. There was Commandant Dietrich, a German SS officer who ran the entire complex, a man who spoke of purification and racial hygiene as casually as others talk about the weather. Dietrich never shouted. He never lost his temper. He was simply convinced, with absolute certainty, that what they were doing was right and necessary. There was Captain Miller, head of security, a brutal man who took visible pleasure in inflicting suffering. His eyes shone with excitement during interrogations. He volunteered for the difficult cases, those that required more persuasive methods. And then there was the medical officer, Dr. Kraus. He was the most terrifying of all, precisely because he resembled a kindly grandfather. He smiled at the guards. He asked about their families, and then he would descend into the underground chambers and oversee experiments that transformed human beings into guinea pigs. Reyes was supposed to work with these men, eat with them, shake their hands, make them believe he was one of them. That was the hardest part. Not the violence he witnessed, but the normalcy he had to feign, the forced laughter at Miller's jokes, the polite acquiescence to Dietrich's theories, the complicit silence in the face of Kraus's medical reports. Each day, Reyes felt a little dirtier, a little more lost, as if his soul was gradually fading away, replaced by a mask that stuck more and more tightly to his skin. But every Sunday, for exactly 3 minutes timed by stopwatch, he would go down to the basement and unlock that service door. He developed a system, a routine invisible to everyone. At precisely 12:15 p.m., while the interrogations were in full swing upstairs, while all the guards were busy, while the entire complex vibrated with noise and confusion, Reyes was doing his inspection. He never spoke directly to the prisoners. It was too dangerous. Instead, he left signs. A chalk mark on a specific wall, a particular arrangement of objects in a corridor, clues that only those desperately seeking a way out could notice. And they noticed. The prisoners had developed their own clandestine communication network, whispers exchanged in the darkness, coded messages scrawled on scraps of cloth. They called the service door the Sunday passage. No one knew who opened it. No one knew why. But they knew that between 12:15 and 12:18, for precisely 3 minutes, that door was unlocked. The problem was that not everyone could escape. The tunnel led to the forest, but then what? Europe was at war. The Nazis controlled everything. A Jewish prisoner in a striped uniform wouldn't get far alone. You had to be in a group. You had to have a plan. You had to have a chance of survival beyond the compound. So the prisoners organized themselves. The strongest helped the weakest. The youngest carried the oldest. They left in groups of 3 or 4, never more so as not to attract attention. They took with them whatever food they could steal. They navigated using memorized maps of snippets of conversations overheard between guards. In 3 months, Reyes had facilitated the escape of 47 people. 47 lives snatched from the clutches of death. 47 ghosts now haunting the forests of Europe, searching for a path to freedom. But Reyes didn't know how many had actually survived. He didn't know if his 3 minutes of courage were worth anything compared to the thousands he couldn't save. Because for every person who escaped, 100 others remained and died. One June evening, after a particularly brutal Sunday in which 23 prisoners had been tortured to death, Reyes sat alone in his room. In his hands, He held a crumpled letter his mother had sent him months before. It spoke of the garden she tended, of the roses that had bloomed that spring, and of the community praying for his safe return. "We are so proud of you, my son. Your father would be too. You serve your country with honor." Reyes crumpled the letter and threw it against the wall. Honor. The word burned his throat like poison. It served no honorable purpose. He was the guardian of a human slaughterhouse. The fact that he secretly saved a few lives didn't change the fact that he was actively participating in the destruction of thousands more. He stood up and looked at himself in the small mirror hanging on the wall. He didn't recognize the man facing him. Deep, dark circles under his eyes, wrinkles that hadn't been there 6 months before, eyes that had seen too much and could never forget. "What have you become?" he murmured to his reflection. The reflection did not respond. It simply stared at it with the same mixture of disgust and despair. That night, Reyes made a decision. He couldn't save everyone, but he could save more. He had to find a way to widen the passage, to create more opportunities, to transform his 3 weekly minutes into something more meaningful. But to do that, he had to take even greater risks. The next day, during a meeting with Dietrich and the other officers, Reyes proposed something unexpected. He suggested reorganizing the interrogation system to make it more efficient. Instead of concentrating all the sessions on Sunday, why not spread them out over several days? This would allow for more thorough interrogations, he argued with a clinical calm that made Dietrich smile. "Excellent, Reyes. That's why we chose you. You think like a professional." The proposal was accepted. Starting the following week, the interrogations would take place 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday. The other officers saw this as an intensification of their mission, increased efficiency. Reyes gave that impression exactly, but the truth is that by spreading out the interrogations, he was also spreading out the surveillance. The guards couldn't be everywhere at once. There would be more moments when attention would be diverted. More opportunities to go down to the basement unnoticed, more chances of opening this door. On the first Monday the new system was in operation, Reyes managed to unlock the door twice in the same day. 5 prisoners escaped. The following Wednesday, 7 more. On Sunday, 8. In 2 weeks, it had doubled its effectiveness. But he had also doubled his risks. Captain Miller was beginning to notice disturbing details, disappearances that didn't fit any logical pattern. Prisoners vanishing during interrogation days precisely when all attention should have been focused on them. "That's strange," said Muller one evening at dinner, staring at his glass of beer. "It looks like someone is helping these rats escape." Silence fell around the table. Dietrich put down his fork. "What are you implying, Muller?" "I'm not implying anything, Commander. I'm simply stating that we've lost 63 prisoners in 3 months. That's an unusual escape rate for such a secure facility." Reyes took a sip of water, keeping his face perfectly neutral. His heart was beating so fast that he was certain everyone could hear it. "Perhaps they are more organized than we think," he said calmly. "These people are desperate. Desperation breeds ingenuity." Dietrich nodded. "Reyes is right. Mueller, I want you to increase surveillance. Double the night patrols. Check all access points. All of them." Mueller nodded, and his eyes lingered on Reyes for a second too long. Just long enough for an icy shiver to run down the American's spine. He knew Mueller couldn't prove anything, but he knew something didn't add up. And now he would search. He would dig. He would question. Reyes returned to his room that evening knowing he had just crossed a new threshold. He was no longer just a secret saboteur. He had become a potential suspect. The trap was beginning to close around him, and he didn't know how long he could continue dancing on that invisible tightrope between salvation and damnation. Surveillance tightened like a vice. Miller wasn't joking. In 48 hours, he had tripled the patrols, installed new checkpoints, and implemented an unpredictable guard rotation system. Every corridor, every staircase, every corner of the complex was now scrutinized with methodical paranoia. Reyes felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him, Not openly. No one was accusing him. But there was this new tension in the air, this subtle mistrust that transformed every innocuous gesture into a potentially suspicious act. He needed to be smarter, more patient, more invisible than ever. For 2 weeks, he didn't open the door once. He continued his routine inspections but never went down to the basement. He became even more zealous in his reports, even more efficient in his supervision. He became the very model of the irreproachable officer. Miller was watching him. Reyes knew it, so he gave him exactly what he was looking for. Nothing. No anomalies. No flaws in the routine. Just an American commander doing his duty with mechanical precision. But meanwhile, in the shadows of the barracks, the prisoners were beginning to lose hope. The Sunday passage no longer opened. The door remained locked. Some whispered that their invisible guardian angel had been discovered. Others thought he had simply given up. Among them was a woman named Sarah Lieberman, 34 years old. A literature professor in Berlin before her life was torn away, shredded, reduced to that number tattooed on her left forearm, 4729. Sarah was not like the other prisoners. She possessed the rare ability to keep her mind intact, despite the horror that surrounded her. She observed, she analyzed, she memorized. In this world where everything was designed to erase humanity, she clung desperately to her intelligence as if it were a lifeline. She was the first to notice the pattern. The door that opened on Sundays at 12:15 p.m., the chalk marks on the walls, the subtle signs left by someone who couldn't communicate directly, but was still trying to guide the lost towards freedom. Sarah had organized the first escapes. She had chosen who would leave. She had established the rules. The youngest first, those with a chance of surviving in the forest, families together when possible, the sick and the weak only if they had someone strong to carry them. She had saved 32 people by making those impossible decisions, and she had also condemned hundreds of others by leaving them behind. That weight weighed on her like a stone in her chest. Now that the door wouldn't open, Sarah could feel despair creeping into even the most resilient. She saw it in their blank stares. She heard it in their silences. Hope is a fragile thing. Once broken, it's almost impossible to mend. One July morning, while working in the complex's laundry room, Sarah spotted Reyes walking down the adjacent hallway. She had never seen him up close before. Only from a distance from the courtyard, when he supervised the interrogations from his walkway. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Reyes didn't slow down. He showed no sign of recognition, but Sarah saw something in his eyes. Something that didn't match the rest of his stony face. She lives off pain. That night Sarah took an insane risk. She scribbled a microscopic message on a torn scrap of fabric in the hem of her dress. 4 words in English. We're waiting. Thank you. 4729. The next day she was to deliver the clean laundry to the officers' quarters. When she placed the pile outside Reyes's room, she slipped the piece of cloth under his door. A gesture so quick, so discreet that even she wasn't sure she'd really done it. Then she left, her heart pounding, certain that she had just made the mistake that would kill her. Reyes found the message that evening when he returned to his room. He picked up the piece of fabric, read the 4 words, and for the first time in weeks, something inside him loosened slightly. They knew. At least one person knew that someone was trying to help them. And she thanked him, her. Reyes burned the fabric immediately. Too dangerous to keep it. But the words remained etched in his mind. We wait. He had to find a way to reopen the passage. But how? With Miller prowling everywhere like a hunting dog. The answer came to him 3 days later, during a casual conversation with Dr. Krauss. The doctor complained about the lack of space in his medical laboratory. The underground rooms were cluttered with equipment, files, and specimens he had to store for his research. He needed an extra room, a secluded place where he could work undisturbed. The basement of Block D, Reyes said suddenly. There are unused rooms down there, old storage areas. I can have them cleaned out and made available to you. Krauss's eyes lit up. Really? That would be perfect. I'll take care of it. I'll supervise the cleaning myself. We'll start tomorrow. Dietrich approved the proposal without hesitation. Reyes was definitely a model officer. Always practical solutions. Always focused on efficiency. The next day, Reyes went down to the basement with a team of 4 prisoners tasked with cleaning the abandoned rooms. Among them, by a carefully orchestrated coincidence, was Sarah Lieberman. For 2 hours, under the guise of supervising the cleanup, Reyes was able to observe the basement with complete legitimacy. He noted the new patrol patterns. He identified the blind spots created by the piled-up equipment. He calculated the new timings, and most importantly, he found a way to communicate with Sarah without speaking. While inspecting an old shelf, he moved a metal box to reveal an inscription he had carved into the wood. Monday, 6:03 p.m. Sarah was cleaning the floor a few meters away. She saw the gesture, understood the message, nodded her head imperceptibly as she continued scrubbing. The following Monday at precisely 6 o'clock, while Miller was supervising an interrogation on the 2nd floor, while Dietrich was in a meeting with officials from Berlin, while the guards were changing posts in temporary confusion, Reyes went down to the basement under the pretext of checking the installation of Krauss's new laboratory. He opened the service door for exactly 3 minutes. 4 prisoners disappeared that night. Miller launched a furious investigation. But how could he suspect Reyes, who was precisely in the process of improving security by creating new controlled areas? The system resumed, but differently, more unpredictable. Reyes varied the days, the times, sometimes Monday, sometimes Thursday. Never Sunday now, because it had become too obvious. He used administrative tasks as a cover. An inspection here, a check there, always an official reason to be in the basement, and Sarah became his invisible link. She organized the escapes. She chose who would leave. She transmitted information through the prisoners' clandestine network. They never spoke directly to each other, but they communicated through moved objects, microscopic messages, coded gestures that only they understood. In 6 weeks, 83 more people escaped. But the noose continued to tighten. Miller was obsessed. He spent entire nights studying the records, searching for correlations and patterns. He interrogated guards. He had hidden cameras installed in certain corridors. He created false rumors to test reactions. And then, at the beginning of September, he had a hunch. The escapes never happened on days when Reyes wasn't at the compound. Never. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But Mueller didn't believe in coincidences. One evening after dinner, he took Reyes aside. "You are an excellent officer, Commander," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Truly. Your dedication is remarkable." "Thank you, Captain. I have a favor to ask. I'm organizing a surprise inspection next week, a complete check of all sectors. I'd like you to accompany me. Your American eye might spot flaws that we Germans no longer see out of habit." Reyes felt his blood run cold, but his face remained impassive. "Of course. When would you like to have this inspection done?" "I'll tell you that very morning. To avoid any leaks, you understand." "Naturally." Mueller patted him on the shoulder amicably. "We're finally going to catch this traitor who's helping the rats escape. I can feel it. He's among us. Someone who knows the complex well. Someone who has access to everything." He stared straight into Reyes's eyes. Someone above suspicion. That night, Reyes didn't sleep. He was facing an impossible dilemma. If he kept opening the door, Miller would eventually catch him in the act during one of his surprise inspections. But if he stopped, everyone he had given hope to would fall back into utter despair. He thought of his father, of those words spoken on his deathbed. "Be the one who opens the doors." He had opened a door, literally. And now, that door risked closing forever. On him. On all those he wouldn't have time to save. The next morning, while going down to the basement for a routine inspection, Reyes found another message from Sarah, scrawled on a piece of paper hidden behind a pipe. 147 saved. Thank you. Don't sacrifice yourselves. 147 lives. That's what he had managed to snatch from the death machine. 147 people who were still breathing, thanks to the 3 minutes he had stolen from the system. But how many others hadn't been so lucky? How many had died while he signed reports, supervised torture, and played his role as an effective accomplice? Reyes crumpled the paper and burned it. Then he made a decision. He wouldn't stop, even if it destroyed him, even if it meant being captured, tortured, executed. He would keep opening that door until he was physically prevented from doing so. Because in this world that had forgotten what it meant to be human, those 3 stolen minutes were perhaps the only thing that still kept him human himself. But he didn't yet know that the real test would come much sooner than he thought, and that he would have to make a choice that would haunt his conscience forever. The surprise inspection took place on a Thursday morning, without warning. Mueller knocked on Reyes's door at 5 o'clock in the morning. His face lit up with predatory excitement. "It's today, Commander. Get dressed. We'll start in 15 minutes. Reyes dressed mechanically, fastening each button of his uniform with fingers that didn't tremble, despite the storm raging in his chest. He knew this moment would come. He had mentally prepared himself for it. But now that he was here, face to face with the possibility of his exposure, his whole body screamed to flee, except there was nowhere to run. The inspection began on the upper floors. Miller had brought 6 hand-picked guards, men known for their fanatical loyalty and obsessive attention to detail. They searched every room, every closet, every nook and cranny. They questioned the guards on duty. They checked the logs. They compared the schedules. Reyes accompanied them, his face impassive, offering suggestions, pointing out minor irregularities in the procedures himself. He played the role of the zealous officer who wants to help flush out the traitor. And he played it perfectly. But with each floor they descended, with each step that brought them closer to the basement, her heart beat a little faster. At 11 o'clock, they reached the underground level. "Dr. Krause's new laboratory is this way," said Mueller, walking down the dark corridor. "You oversaw the installation, didn't you, Reyes?" "Indeed. Everything conforms to the specifications." They inspected the laboratory. Krause was absent that day, having gone to Berlin for a medical conference. The room was filled with surgical equipment, jars containing things Reyes preferred not to identify, and meticulously filed documents documenting systematic horrors. Miller spent 10 minutes examining everything. Then he turned towards the end of the corridor. "And over there? Those abandoned rooms that you had cleaned?" "Reservations. Nothing interesting." "Let's check anyway. You never know." They moved forward. Reyes felt each step like a nail being driven into his coffin. In 3 meters they would reach the corridor leading to the service door. The door he had last opened 48 hours earlier. The door behind which 147 souls had found their way to a chance at freedom. Miller stopped in front of the first storage room. He opened it, inspected the inside. Dusty shelves, moldy boxes, nothing unusual. He moved on to the next one, then to the next one. Reyes calculated in his mind. The service door was at the end of the corridor, hidden behind a pile of crates he had carefully arranged to conceal it. Miller might not see it. If the gods of war had any mercy, he wouldn't see it. But Miller wasn't the type to leave anything to chance. "Those crates over there," he said, pointing to the end of the corridor. "Why are they stacked like that?" "Lack of storage space. We put things there that weren't a priority. Let's see what's behind it." The guards began moving the crates. Reyes remained motionless, watching his own defenses be dismantled piece by piece. His mind raced, searching for an explanation, an excuse, anything that could justify the existence of this door. And then it appeared. Rusty, metallic, with traces of recent use visible in the dust. Miller approached slowly, like a cat that has finally cornered its prey. "Interesting. A service door. You were aware of its existence, Commander?" "Yes, it's an old technical exit. It's supposed to be sealed." "Supposed to be?" Miller pulled on the handle. The door opened with a creak that echoed like a cannon shot in the underground silence. The corridor behind revealed the escape tunnel, footprints in the dust, scraps of fabric clinging to the rough edges of the wall, irrefutable proof that this door had been used recently and frequently. Mueller turned to Reyes. His smile was that of a predator savoring his victory. How strange. You were overseeing this area. You had the keys. And yet, this security-critical door was not only unsealed, but clearly being used as an escape route. The guards raised their weapons, pointing them at Reyes, not yet in a threatening way, just ready. Reyes looked Mueller in the eyes. He could deny it, played ignorance, blame a corrupt guard. Maybe it would work, maybe he could get away with it. But looking at that triumphant smile, feeling the weight of all those weeks of lies, compromises, supervised torture, and forced complicity, something broke inside him for good. He was tired of pretending. "You're right, Captain," Reyes said calmly. "I knew about that door, and yes, I left it open. Deliberately." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the guards seemed shocked by this very direct admission. Mueller blinked, momentarily unsettled. He had prepared himself for a long confrontation, for denials, for having to prove his theory, not for an immediate confession. You admit to having helped prisoners escape?" "Yes." "How much?" 147, to date." Mueller turned scarlet. "You are a traitor to your uniform, to your country, to the cause." "I am not a traitor," Reyes replied with an uncanny serenity. "I have simply become human again." One of the guards struck Reyes on the head with the butt of his rifle. He collapsed against the wall, the taste of blood in his mouth. But even as he fell, he was almost smiling. For the first time in months, he wasn't wearing a mask. They dragged him out of the basement. The entire complex was put on alert. Dietrich, urgently recalled from his meeting, arrived 2 hours later, his face contorted by a cold rage that Reyes had never seen in him. Reyes was thrown into solitary confinement, a 3-square-meter room without a window, with just a bucket in the corner and a metal bed bolted to the floor. They left him there for 3 days without food or water, just so he would understand what was coming. On the 4th day, Dietrich came to visit him. The SS commander sat down on a folding chair brought especially for the occasion. He lit a cigarette and observed Reyes in silence for a long minute. "Why?" he finally asked. "That's all I want to understand. Why would a brilliant officer like yourself, with a promising future, decide to destroy everything for them?" Reyes, leaning against the wall, his lips split and one eye half closed, looked at him with something resembling pity. "Because they are human, Commander. Like you. Like me. And no ideology, no order, no war can change that fundamental fact." Dietrich took a drag on his cigarette. "You're naive. Or crazy. Maybe both. Maybe. But at least I can still look at myself in a mirror. Do you think your 147 escapes change anything? We have killed 10 Izonen here, 100 Izun in other camps. Your pathetic efforts are but a drop in the ocean of historical necessity. A drop of water that saved 147 lives. For them it wasn't a drop. It was everything." Dietrich crushed his cigarette under his boot. "You will be tried, then executed, and your name will be erased from all records. No one will ever know what you did. It's not a big deal. I'll know." The trial was a farce. 3 SS officers, Mueller among them, sat behind a table in a windowless room. No lawyer, no witnesses. Just Reyes standing, handcuffed, listening to the list of his crimes enumerated with bureaucratic precision. Treason, sabotage, aiding the enemy, conspiracy against the Reich. The verdict was delivered in less than 5 minutes. Death by hanging. Execution scheduled for dawn the following day. Reyes was taken back to his cell. He sat on his metal bed and waited. He thought about his mother in Montana. She would receive an official letter announcing his death in combat. She would never know the truth. Perhaps it was for the best. He was thinking of his father. Be the one who opens the doors. He had tried. God knows he had tried. He thought of the 147 people walking somewhere in Europe, carrying within them the secret of his existence. Perhaps some would survive. Perhaps one day they would tell their story. Or perhaps not. At midnight he heard noises in the corridor, whispers, the creaking of a lock. The door to his cell opened. Sarah Lieberman stood there holding a stolen set of keys accompanied by 3 other prisoners. "You opened doors for us," she murmured. "Now it's our turn." Reyes shook his head. "You're crazy. They'll kill you all." "They're killing us anyway. We might as well die trying to do something right." "How did you know where to find me?" "Prisoners know everything in a camp. We listen, we see, we remember, and we never forget those who helped us." She handed him the keys. "Come, we know a way, not the back door. Another one. Something we discovered ourselves." Reyes looked at this woman, at the number tattooed on her arm, at this person they had tried to reduce to less than human and who was now risking everything to save her repentant executioner. And for the first time in months, tears streamed down her face. "I don't deserve this. No one deserves anything in this hell. But we still choose to save each other. That's what keeps us human." They escaped that night. 5 shadows gliding through the darkness of a complex that thought it had crushed all resistance. They used a sewer tunnel that the prisoners had discovered and kept secret, waiting for the right moment to use it. At dawn, when the guards came to get Reyes for execution, they found an empty cell and a message scrawled on the wall with charcoal. "The doors open in both directions." Miller flew into such a rage that he had 6 guards executed on the spot. Dietrich ordered a massive manhunt, but it was too late. The fugitives had a 6-hour head start, and the forest was vast. They never found Colton Reyes. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and terror. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the dead leaves could mean a hunting patrol. Dogs barked in the distance, their voices carried by the icy October wind. Reyes and the 4 prisoners ran, stumbled, got up, and ran again. Sarah led the group with a determination that seemed to draw on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. The 3 other prisoners were David, a tailor from Warsaw who had lost his wife and 2 daughters in the gas chambers; Rebecca, a 16-year-old girl whose parents had been shot dead in front of her on the day of their arrest; and Solomon, a 68-year-old rabbi whose white beard was now dirty and tangled, but whose eyes still shone with unwavering faith. They walked for 3 days and 3 nights, hiding by day in abandoned barns, advancing by night under a moonless sky. They ate whatever they could find: roots, berries, moldy bread stolen from a remote farm. The stream water burned their throats. It was so cold. Reyes knew their escape was desperate. All of Europe was at war. The Nazis controlled everything. They had no papers, no money, no contacts. They were 5 ghosts wandering in a world that was hunting them. But something strange happened during those 3 days. Something Reyes hadn't anticipated. He began to talk with them. Really talk. Not like a commander to his subordinates. Not like a jailer to his prisoners. But like one human being to other human beings. Sarah told him about her life before. Her apartment in Berlin filled with books. Her students who would come to her place for tea after class to discuss Goethe and Kafka. Her husband, a cellist who played in the Philharmonic Orchestra, and who had been shot dead in the street in 1938, simply because he had refused to spit on an old Jewish man being harassed by brown shirts. "I could have fled," she said one night as they rested in a damp cave. "I had friends in Switzerland who offered me refuge, but I didn't want to abandon my students. I thought things would work out, that the madness would pass." She laughed bitterly. "You always think the madness will pass, until it devours you." David spoke little, but one night, as Solomon softly recited prayers in Hebrew, he whispered to Reyes, "I made suits for all of Warsaw's high society, generals, diplomats, artists. I sewed their dreams into fabric, and now I wear rags that have already clothed 3 corpses before me." He looked at his emaciated hands in the flickering light of their small fire. "But I still know how to sew. If I survive, I will sew again, because that's what keeps me human." Rebecca almost never spoke. She would huddle against Sarah, trembling, her eyes fixed on some invisible point. One night, Reyes surprised her crying silently. He approached, not knowing what to say. I can't remember my mother's face, she murmured. I try so hard, but all I see is blood. Always blood. Reyes sat down beside her. He said nothing. Sometimes there is nothing to say. He just stayed there, a silent presence in the night while she cried all the tears her emaciated body could still produce. And Solomon, the old rabbi who should have been broken by everything he'd seen, but who every morning recited his prayers as if God were still listening. One evening, Reyes asked him how he could still believe after all that. Solomon looked at him with eyes that had seen an entire world die and smiled gently. Do you think faith means believing that God will protect us? No, my son. Faith means continuing to be human even when God seems to have abandoned us. It is our act of rebellion against the darkness. On the fourth day, their luck changed. They had reached a small town on the border between Austria and Switzerland. It was a crossing point the Nazis monitored, but not with the same intensity as the larger cities. Sarah knew someone there, a former student who had joined the resistance. If she could find him, perhaps he could help them cross the border. But when they entered the city just before dawn, hiding in the dark alleyways, they fell directly into the arms of a patrol. 6 soldiers, armed, alert. One of them lit a torch and pointed it directly at Reyes's face. Halt! Identify yourself! For a split second, Reyes considered fleeing. He thought of shouting to the others to run while he held the soldiers back, but he knew it would be pointless. They were exhausted, starving, at the end of their strength. They wouldn't last 10 meters. Then he made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He straightened up, adopted the military posture he had abandoned 4 days earlier, and spoke in German with the authority of a senior officer. Commander Colton Reyes, assigned to the Special Detention Complex. I am escorting these prisoners for a confidential transfer to an interrogation center in Switzerland. Lower your weapons immediately. The soldiers hesitated. It was so unexpected, so audacious, that they didn't know how to react. An American officer in rags, without a uniform, without papers, demanding authority in the middle of the night with 4 Jewish prisoners. The sergeant leading the patrol stepped forward. He was a man in his 40s, his face marked by too many wars. He looked intently at Reyes. You have no papers, no uniform, and you look like a fugitive. Because I'm undercover, you idiot. You think I'm traveling with high-value prisoners in dress uniform? This mission is top secret. If you compromise it, you'll answer to Commander Dietrich personally. The name Dietrich made the sergeant shudder. Everyone knew Dietrich. His reputation for cruelty and intransigence preceded him. No one wanted to attract his attention, but the sergeant wasn't completely convinced. I need to check with my superior. Of course. Meanwhile, these prisoners who hold critical information about resistance networks will remain here on the street, visible to any terrorist cell that's watching. Excellent idea, Sergeant. I'll mention your name in my report. The sergeant hesitated. He was tired. He was at the end of his shift, and he really didn't want any trouble with the complex military bureaucracies that governed special operations. Where exactly is your destination? Reyes improvised. The Hohenstein border post. I must deliver these prisoners before 8 o'clock this morning. After that, your responsibility in this matter will be over, and you can return to your routine without having compromised an operation that exceeds your clearance level. It was a crazy gamble. But Reyes was playing on fatigue, bureaucracy, and that universal fear that the lower ranks of the military have of getting involved in something that could destroy their career. The sergeant looked at his men. Then he looked at Reyes, then at Sarah and the others who stood motionless, barely breathing, aware that their lives were at stake in these suspended seconds. Very well, the sergeant finally said, but I'll escort you to the station, to make sure everything is in order. Reyes's heart sank. This was worse. Now they would have to maintain this bluff all the way to the border crossing, where their deception would be immediately exposed. But he calmly agreed. As you wish, Sergeant, but let's hurry. Time is of the essence. They marched through the city in an absurd procession. 6 German soldiers escorting a fake American officer, and 4 Jewish prisoners to a border post where they would all be captured or killed. Sarah was walking near Reyes. She whispered so softly that only he could hear her. "What are you doing?" "I'm improvising. Do you have a better idea?" "We are all going to die. Probably, but at least we'll die trying." They approached the border post just before dawn. The barriers were down. Searchlights swept the area. A dozen guards patrolled, checking papers, searching the few vehicles that attempted to cross the line. The sergeant approached the main guardhouse. "I have an American commander who claims to be conducting a confidential prisoner transfer." The officer in charge came out. He was a young, overzealous lieutenant with glasses that reflected the light from the spotlights. "Show me your mission orders." Reyes looked him straight in the eyes. "I have no written orders. This mission is verbal, code Black Level 3. If you don't know what that means, contact Dietrich HQ immediately." The lieutenant frowned. "There is no such thing as a Level 3 Black code in standard protocols." "Precisely. Because this isn't standard, it's special, confidential, above your clearance level and mine. I'm just the messenger. And if you delay this delivery by 1 more minute, we'll all be in an extremely unpleasant situation." The lieutenant hesitated. He was young, inexperienced, and something about Reyes's absolute tone unsettled him. But he wasn't stupid. "Wait here, I'll check with Berlin." He returned to the sentry box and picked up the field telephone. Sarah whispered, "It's over." Reyes looked around. Soldiers surrounded them. Searchlights illuminated them. There was no way out, no escape this time. He thought of his father one last time. Be the one who opens the doors. He had tried. He had opened so many doors. But this last door, the one that led to freedom, remained stubbornly closed to them. Solomon began to pray softly in Hebrew. David closed his eyes. Rebecca was trembling violently. And then something unexpected happened. An explosion rang out in the distance. Then another. Sirens wailed. Shouts rose from the city behind them. The lieutenant rushed out of the sentry box. "Bombing! The Allies are bombing the city! Everyone to cover!" Chaos erupted instantly. Soldiers ran in all directions. The searchlights went out. The guards abandoned their posts to take refuge in the bunkers. Reyes seized the opportunity without hesitation. "With me, now." They ran towards the barrier. Sarah lifted it. They slipped underneath. Behind them, no one was paying attention. Everyone was trying to save their own skin. They crossed the neutral zone between the 2 posts. 50 meters that seemed to last an eternity. 50 meters where every second could bring a bullet in their back. And then they crossed the line. They were in Switzerland. They collapsed on the other side, unable to believe they were still alive. Swiss guards approached, weapons lowered, their faces curious but not hostile. "We are refugees," Sarah said in French, her voice breaking. "We are fleeing the camps." The guards helped them to their feet. They guided them to a reception center. They gave them water, blankets, a semblance of humanity after months of hell. Reyes sat down on a wooden bench, watching his hands tremble uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was wearing off. He had done it. Against all logic, against all odds. He had saved 4 more people. But when he looked up, he saw Sarah's gaze fixed on him, and he understood that she knew what he knew. That they had simply been incredibly lucky. That the bombings had come at the exact moment they needed them. But they had also left behind more than 1,000 people who would never have that chance. The war ended 7 months later. Europe lay in ruins, littered with corpses and secrets buried too deep to ever resurface. The nameless complex was discovered by Allied troops in April 1945. What they found there haunted them for the rest of their lives. Bodies. Thousands of bodies. Piled in mass graves. Burned in makeshift ovens. Abandoned in underground cells where no one had come to retrieve them. Block D had become a giant tomb. Dietrich had fled before the Allies arrived. Müller was captured and committed suicide in his cell before his trial. Dr. Krauss disappeared completely, probably in South America along with so many other Nazi ghosts. And Colton Reyes? The American military records listed him as killed in action in March 1944. His mother received a posthumous medal, a simple ceremony in a small Montana church, a life neatly erased from the records. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, Reyes was living under a false name in a modest boarding house in Geneva. The Swiss authorities knew who he really was, but faced with the extraordinary circumstances, they chose to turn a blind eye. He worked as a translator for the Red Cross, helping to locate survivors, reunite shattered families, and document the unspeakable. Sarah, David, Rebecca, and Solomon all survived. Sarah returned to Germany after the war and became a witness at the Nuremberg trials. David opened a small tailor shop in Tel Aviv. Rebecca was adopted by a family in France and became a nurse. Solomon spent his final years on a kibbutz, teaching the Talmud to a new generation untouched by the horrors of war. Reyes never saw them again. It was too dangerous. The American military authorities were still searching for him, considering him a deserter and a traitor. If he resurfaced, he would be arrested, tried, and likely executed for his official crimes against the army. So he remained dead. And he lived with his ghosts. Years passed, decades. The world rebuilt. The war became history, then memory, then textbooks that no one really read. The camps were transformed into museums. The witnesses died one by one, taking their truths to silent graves. In 1989, a historian named Michael Stern was working on a thesis documenting clandestine resistance in concentration camps. He interviewed survivors, compiled testimonies, and looked for patterns in the documented chaos. That's when he noticed something strange. Several survivors of the unnamed complex mentioned a Sunday door in their testimonies. They described mysterious escapes, a road to freedom that opened at specific times, as if someone were guiding them from within. But no one knew who. The survivors had never seen their savior. Just signs, marks. A door unlocked for 3 precisely calculated minutes. Stern became obsessed. He compiled 147 testimonies from people who had used this escape route. 147 stories that all converged on the same impossible conclusion. Someone inside the system had helped them. He searched the archives. He questioned former guards. He combed through American and German military files. And finally, he found the name of Colton Reyes, an American commander listed as dead in 1944. But his file contained troubling inconsistencies. A capture reported by the Germans. An escape. Then nothing. As if someone had deliberately erased the evidence. Stern published an article in an obscure historical journal in 1991, The Ghost of Block D in Search of the Invisible Savior. The article went almost unnoticed, just a footnote in the vast amount of Holocaust literature. But Sarah Lieberman read it. She was 81 years old now, living in a small apartment in Munich, surrounded by her rediscovered books and her painstakingly reconstructed memories. She contacted Stern, and she told him the whole story. "He didn't just help us escape," she said, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "He saved his humanity, and for 47 years the world treated him like a war criminal." Stern organized a conference in 1993. He gathered as many survivors as possible. 23 people were still alive, scattered across the globe. They came to Geneva to testify, to recount how a mysterious door had opened in their hell, how someone they had never seen had given them a chance. The media seized upon the story. Suddenly, Colton Reyes was no longer a ghost. He became a legend, the man who had saved 147 lives from within the very machine of death. But where was he? The reply arrived 3 weeks later. A letter sent to Stern's office. No sender's name, just an address in Geneva and a few handwritten lines. "I am the one you are looking for, but I am not a hero. I oversaw the torture of thousands of people. I signed reports that led to countless deaths. The fact that I saved 147 lives does not compensate for the thousands I could not save. I deserve neither forgiveness nor recognition, just oblivion." Stern went to the address, a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood. He knocked. No one answered. The concierge informed him that the tenant, an elderly man named Martin Dubois, had died the previous week. Heart attack. He was 81 years old. He lived alone. No one came to claim the body. Stern obtained permission to enter the apartment. What he found there shocked him. Walls covered in names. Hundreds of names written in pencil, in ink, etched into the plaster. The names of all those who had died in the complex while Reyes served there. All those he hadn't been able to save. On a table, a diary. 47 years of meticulously documented guilt. Every night Reyes had written, calculated, weighed his moral debt. 147 lives saved against thousands lost. The equation never balanced. The last entry, dated 3 days before his death, simply read, "I still don't know if I made a difference, but at least I tried to remain human. Perhaps that's all one can do in a world that has forgotten what that word means." The survivors organized a funeral. They buried Colton Reyes under his real name in a small cemetery near Geneva. 23 people were present. 23 lives he had directly touched. And behind them the children and grandchildren of the 147. A constellation of lives that would never have existed without those 3 minutes stolen from Sunday. Sarah stood before the grave, holding a crumpled piece of fabric she had kept for 50 years. The message she had slipped under her door in 1944. "We are waiting. Thank you." 4729. "You once told me that we choose to be human even when God seems to have abandoned us," she murmured. "You made that choice. And because of that choice, 147 lights continued to shine in the darkness." The American government refused to officially pardon him. Military records still listed him as a deserter. But the survivors created their own memorial, a garden in Jerusalem with 147 trees, one for each life saved. In the center, a plaque. Colton Reyes, 1912-1993. He opened doors when the world was closing them. Reyes' story forces us to ask impossible questions. Can one be both executioner and savior? Accomplice and resistance fighter? Do 147 lives save a soul that participated in the destruction of thousands of others? There is no easy answer. Just this truth: in humanity's darkest moments, even the smallest act of rebellion against horror matters. Even 3 minutes stolen from a killing machine, even a door unlocked in the dark. And you? What would you have done in his place? Would you have had the courage to open that door knowing you could lose everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe to discover more stories that history has tried to erase. Because to remember is to resist, and to resist is to remain human.